Hello, I'm Peter. I'm so glad you could join me for tonight's journey. Tonight, we face a deadly contradiction. We are traveling to a time when fresh air was the enemy, and a room filled with choking smoke was the only thing keeping you alive. Why would a civilization known for its strength choose to live in darkness, intentionally trapping poisonous fumes inside their own homes? Welcome to the 9th century near the Arctic Circle. This isn't just cold. This is an environment where the sap freezes inside the trees until the wood explodes like a gunshot, where exposed skin turns black in minutes and the sun abandons the sky for 20 hours a day. So forget the stone castles and airy halls with roaring chimneys you see in Hollywood. Those would be death traps here. The truth is much more intimate and perhaps uncomfortable. To survive this siege of winter, you wouldn't be sleeping in a private room. You would be packed into a windowless turf tunnel shoulder to shoulder with 30 other people and their livestock. History is a vast cold wilderness, and nights are long. Keep your subscription active. It's the small fire that guides you back to us when the next story begins. Now pull your blankets up tight. Let the heat of your own room settle around you. We are going to learn how, in the frozen dark of history, humanity didn't just endure the long night. They embraced it. Let's begin. The ship came in autumn when the lights still lingered. From the fjord, you saw them low mounds, half swallowed by the hillside smoke, leaking not from chimneys, but from ragged holes in living roofs of grass. You thought it looked ancient, almost primitive. You were wrong. That was 3 months ago. It feels like 3 lifetimes. Now it's deep winter in this Viking village, perched at the edge of the knowable world, somewhere in what will one day be called northern Norway, a latitude so extreme that the sun has become a memory, a rumor, something children ask their parents about, with the earnest confusion of those who cannot quite believe in what they haven't seen. You've learned to read the subtle gradations of warmth within these walls. There's the zone nearest the fire, where heat is a palpable presence, almost uncomfortable if you sit too close after coming in from outside. Then there's the middle distance where most people work during the day, where the temperature is bearable if you're moving, if you're active, if your blood is flowing. And then there are the outer edges, the sleeping benches built into the walls, where the cold from outside presses through the thick turf and timber, where you need every blanket, every fur, every body pressed close to maintain life's core temperature. The longhouse where you've spent these months is called Scuggy Shadow, an appropriate name. It's built like a ship turned upside down, and half buried, its wooden ribs curved overhead its walls, more than 6 feet thick at the base, made from alternating layers of stone turf wood. And more turf, each material chosen for its ability to trap dead air, to create barriers against the relentless cold outside. There are no windows. Why would there be? In winter, there's nothing to see but darkness and blowing snow. Light comes from the fire, from oil lamps, from embers glowing in small clay bowls. The air is thick with smoke because there's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that's often plugged with snow or deliberately closed when the wind shifts wrong. You've learned to breathe through this smoke, to move through it, to judge the quality of the air by taste and smell rather than by sight. At first, the smoke made you cough constantly. Your eyes watered, your throat burned. Now you barely notice. The human body adapts even to this. You've also adapted to the smell. Sweet decay of old straw, sharp ammonia, of animal waste, smoke-cured wood, unwashed bodies pressed together for months, fermented fish, sour milk, damp wool, and underneath it all a mineral earthiness from the turf walls themselves. It's not pleasant exactly, but it's life. It's the smell of survival. Outside, the wind is constant. It has different voices, different moods. Sometimes it's a low moan that seems to come from the earth itself. Sometimes it's a shriek that makes the walls tremble and sends fine snow filtering through gaps you didn't know existed. And sometimes, the worst times, it goes completely silent. And that silence is more terrifying than any storm, because it means the cold has intensified to a point where even the air itself seems to freeze in place. You've learned to tell time not by clocks or even by the sun, but by the rhythm of the household. The morning fire, the first feeding of the animals, the sound of someone breaking ice in the water barrel, the afternoon gathering around the fire for the main meal, the evening when the loom goes quiet and the Sega teller's voice rises in the smoky darkness, the long night when bodies shift and settle, when infants cry and are hushed, when the old cough and the fire needs tending. This is your life now. This is what winter survival means in the 9th century at the edge of the Arctic, in a world without fireplaces, without modern insulation, without any of the comforts that will one day be taken for granted. And yet, and this is the strange part, the part you couldn't have predicted, you're not miserable. You're not even particularly afraid anymore. You've learned something that your previous self would have struggled to understand. Warmth isn't just about temperature. Warmth is about proximity, about shared breath, about the press of other lives around you in the darkness. Warmth is communal, or it's nothing at all. Harold is the one who first explained this to you. Harold, with his grey-streaked beard and patient eyes, who seems to have lived through more winters than should be possible, who moves through the smoky interior of the longhouse with the confidence of someone who has made peace with discomfort. You're thinking about fire, he said to you early on, watching you hover near the flames like a moth. Thinking about fire is how Southerners think. Fire is important, yes, but fire isn't what keeps you alive here. You know what keeps you alive. You didn't know then. You shook your head. Walls, he said. Walls and sleep and sheep. He laughed at his own rhyme, his breath pluming in the cold air even inside the house. Walls keep the wind out. Sleep keeps your mind from breaking. And sheep. He gestured toward the far end of the longhouse where the animals were kept separated from the human space by a low partition. Sheep give you wool, meat, milk, and most importantly, they give you heat. A sheep is like a little furnace that feeds itself. You've thought about those words often in the months since, about how survival here isn't a matter of dominating nature or even particularly fighting it. It's about understanding the rules and working within them. It's about accepting limitations and then becoming creative within those limitations. The fire in the center of the longhouse has been burning continuously since the first frost. Not the same fire, obviously. Wood is too precious for that. But the same lineage of fire embers, carefully preserved, fed, coaxed back to life when they threatened to die. Letting the fire go out completely would be a catastrophe. Starting a new fire with flint and steel is possible, but difficult and time-consuming. And in the brief window when you have no fire, the cold would begin its work on the house's interior temperature, dropping it rapidly toward the deadly chill outside. So the fire never dies. Someone is always responsible. Even in the depths of night, someone wakes to add a piece of wood to adjust the burning to ensure continuity. But the fire is kept small, deliberately small. This confused you at first. If fire is life, why not make it as large as possible? Why not consume all the wood at once in a glorious blaze of heat? Astrid answered that question. Astrid, the de facto leader here, a woman of perhaps 40 winters, though age is hard to judge when life is this hard, with a scar running from her left eyebrow to her hairline memento of a raid 5 years ago that she survived and her husband didn't. She rules this household not through inherited right, but through competence, intelligence, and a kind of fierce practicality that brooks no argument. Big fire, she said, crouching beside you one evening, means big wood consumption. Big wood consumption means you run out before spring. Run out before spring means you die. Also, big fire means big temperature change. You get hot near fire, cold everywhere else. Body doesn't know what to do. Better to keep everything just warm enough. Keep it steady. Your body adapts to steady. She was right. You felt this yourself. On the rare occasions when someone throws too much wood on the fire, the heat becomes intense, almost oppressive if you're close to it. But the outer edges of the house grow colder by comparison. The thermal balance of the space is disrupted. People become uncomfortable and irritable. The whole system works better when the fire is modest, constant, and carefully managed. The people here have a vocabulary for cold that you're still learning. There's cold, which is just normal cold, the baseline state of winter existence. There's fast, which means sharp or biting, the kind of cold that comes with wind. There's cold, a bone-deep cold that no amount of layering can fully address. And then there's the cold that has no word, or rather, the word is spoken only in whispers, ut fristo, frozen out, dead from cold, the ultimate failure. No one in this household has died from cold this winter. That's a point of pride. In the next valley, over in a settlement called Morheimer, they lost an elder to the cold during the last full moon. The story was carried by a young man who skied over to trade salted fish for dried berries. The elder had gone out to check on the animals during a storm, gotten disoriented, and by the time they found him, his body was rigid, his eyes open but frosted over. They couldn't bury him. The ground is frozen solid, so he's propped up outside their storage shed, waiting for spring thaw. These are the stakes. This is the world. And yet life continues. Children play, people laugh. Stories are told. Work is done. The daily rhythm of existence persists, even in conditions that would have seemed impossible to your previous self. You're learning a winter survival skill that has nothing to do with fire starting or shelter building, though those matter too. You're learning patience. You're learning to find satisfaction in small warmths. A cup of hot liquid, a dry pair of socks, the press of another person's shoulder against yours in the dark. You're learning to mark time not by days, but by tasks completed by incremental progress toward the distant promise of spring. And spring will come. Everyone says this with the certainty of those who have endured this before. Spring always comes. The question is only whether you'll be alive to see it. The wind outside rises again, and the walls creak softly, and somewhere in the darkness a sheep bleats in its sleep, and these sounds have become your lullaby, your comfort, your proof that you're still alive, still here, still enduring. Let's go deeper into this night. Let's understand what it really means to survive when every conventional notion of warmth has been stripped away. The first thing to understand about a Viking longhouse in the Arctic is that it's not really a house in the way you might imagine. It's more like a living organism, a symbiotic arrangement between humans, animals, architecture, and fire. Picture yourself entering Skuggi just as twilight, that brief grey promise of light that happens around midday even in deep winter, begins to fade. You push aside the heavy skin that serves as a door, and immediately you're hit with that wall of air warm, relative to outside, but thick, smoky, alive with breath and presence. Your eyes take a moment to adjust. The interior is dim lit only by the fire in the central trench and a few small oil lamps placed strategically around the space. The ceiling is lower than you'd expect, maybe 7 feet at its highest point, sloping down toward the walls. This is intentional. Low ceiling means less air to heat, means warmth stays where people are, rather than rising uselessly into empty space. The floor is earth packed hard from years of traffic, covered with old straw and rushes that are changed only a few times during the winter. Beneath this layer, the ground itself provides a kind of insulation. The earth here never freezes more than a few inches down, and that thermal mass helps stabilize the interior temperature. The Vikings understood something that wouldn't be scientifically articulated for another 1,000 years. Thermal mass is just as important as insulation. The longhouse stretches out before you, maybe 50 feet from end to end, 20 feet wide at its broadest. The fire trench runs down the center like a glowing spine. It's not a pit exactly, just a slight depression lined with flat stones to contain the embers and direct the heat. Along both sides of this central fire are the living spaces' raised platforms built against the walls covered with layers of hide wool and fur. These are where people sleep, where they sit during the day, where they work and talk and exist. At the far end of the house, separated by a low wicker partition, the animals are kept. 6 sheep, 2 goats, and the most valuable assets, 3 cattle. You can hear them shifting in their stalls, the soft sounds of their breathing, the occasional bleat or low moo. Their body heat is significant. Each large animal produces about as much heat as a small fire, and unlike fire, they don't need to be fed wood. They just need hay and water, and they transform it into warmth. This arrangement, humans and animals sharing space, would seem barbaric to later generations, unsanitary and primitive. But it's brilliant. The animals provide heat, yes, but they also provide something more subtle: humidity. The house is dry, otherwise the air parched by the fire and the cold. But animal breath, animal bodies, they add moisture to the air, and that moisture makes the space feel warmer than it actually is. Dry cold is more penetrating, more dangerous. The animals, simply by breathing, by living, make the space more habitable. The walls are the true wonder. From inside, you only see woven panels hiding a dead air gap, but behind them lies the real shieldstone timber turf, layered again and again, stuffed with seaweed heather and animal hair. One calm day, Harold took you out and pointed at the snowbanked base. 5 feet of drifted snow pressed against it like extra armor. 6 feet of wall, he said, breath clouding. 6 feet between you and death. Still air is our friend. Wind is the thief. So we trap the air and make it fight for us. The roof is a beast, thick timber ribs carrying birch bark, then turf upon turf upon turf. So heavy that 4 massive tree trunk posts have to stand inside like silent giants just to keep the sky from crushing everyone below. The roof is even more complex. A timber frame supports layers of birch bark turf and more turf, creating a structure so heavy it requires substantial interior posts to hold it up. These posts, 4 of them each carved from a single tree trunk, divide the interior space into sections and provide additional support for the sleeping platforms built against the walls. Near the center of the roof is the smoke hole, currently plugged with a piece of wood and turf because the wind is wrong. When the wind cooperates, this hole allows some smoke to escape. When it doesn't, the smoke just accumulates inside, finding its way out through countless tiny gaps in the roof structure. You've learned to read the smoke to judge air quality by how much you can see across the room, to know when it's dangerous to let it build up further. Ingrid, 50 winters of iron, rules the smoke hole. With a hooked pole, she nudges the turf lid. A crack, when the wind allows, slammed shut when it snarls. Smoke is a guest, she says. Let in a little and it kills bugs, keeps wood sweet, reminds us the fire still lives. Let in too much and it kills us instead. Everything here must be negotiated. The sleeping platforms along the walls are arranged hierarchically. The positions closest to the fire, the most desirable spots, are occupied by Astrid and her immediate family. The next best positions go to skilled workers, people whose contributions are essential. Olaf the hunter, Ingrid the healer, Harald the saga keeper. Lesser positions farther from the fire and closer to the cold walls go to younger people, servants and guests. You sleep in one of these outer positions not out of disrespect, but simply because you're new, unproven, and the social order here is absolute. But here's what you've learned. Even the coldest position in the longhouse is survivable, because survival here is communal. At night, bodies press together. Shame and modesty are luxuries no one can afford. You sleep sandwiched between Olaf's teenage daughter on one side and an old man named Ragnar on the other, all of you wrapped in shared furs, all of you breathing the same dense air, all of you contributing your body heat to the collective warmth. There are no beds, not in the way you might imagine. The sleeping platforms are just raised areas about 2 feet off the ground, which helps avoid the coldest air that settles near the floor. On top of these platforms, layers. First, woven mats made from reeds or birch bark. Then wool blankets felt thick and heavy. Then animal hides, reindeer, seal bear, with the fur facing up to trap body heat. Then more wool. And finally, the communal sleeping fur, an enormous reindeer hide that stretches over multiple people, creating a shared warm pocket. In the middle of the night, when you wake to adjust position or relieve yourself in the designated corner, the cold hits you immediately. The ambient temperature in the house, even with the fire burning, is probably only 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's bearable when you're moving, deadly when you're still. So people don't stay up. They do what's necessary, tend the fire, check the animals, handle personal needs, and then burrow back into the warmth of the collective sleeping area as quickly as possible. The fire trench is never unattended. There's a rotation, informal but absolute. Every few hours, someone wakes, sometimes naturally, sometimes prompted by a subtle kick from a neighbor, and makes the cold journey to the center of the house to add wood to the fire. Not much wood, just enough to keep the embers alive and producing heat. Wood is rationed strictly. Every piece of timber that burns represents hours of labor. Finding it, cutting it, hauling it back to the settlement, drying it enough to burn efficiently. Most of the wood comes from driftwood collected during summer along the coast. Trees don't grow this far north, at least not trees large enough for timber. So every piece of wood arrives as a gift from the sea, carried by currents from forests far to the south, deposited on beaches, and collected obsessively by people who know that wood means life. Some wood comes from peat, compressed, decomposed plant matter, dug from bogs and dried into bricks. Peat burns slowly without much flame, producing steady heat and thick smoke. It's not ideal. It smells of earth and ancient decay. But it's available, and availability trumps preference every time. The oil lamps scattered around the house burn seal oil, sometimes whale oil when it's available. These lamps are simple, shallow stone dishes filled with oil with twisted moss or cloth wicks floating on the surface. The light they produce is faint yellow flickering, but it's enough to see by, enough to do handwork, enough to maintain some visual connection to the space when the outside world is nothing but darkness. Children adapt to this life more easily than adults. There are 4 children in this household, ranging from a nursing infant to a boy of about 10 named Bjarke. They've never known anything different. For them, this is simply how life is. They play games in the dim interior building, small structures from bones and scraps of wood, telling each other stories they've heard from their elders, occasionally venturing outside for brief periods when the weather permits. Bjarke is fascinated by you, by your strangeness, by your outsider perspective. He asks endless questions. Where did you come from? Why don't you know how to repair a fishing net? Have you ever killed a bear? Can you ski? You answer as best you can, trying to bridge the impossible gap between your experience and his. But increasingly, you find yourself thinking his questions through his framework rather than yours. You are becoming slowly a person who understands that survival isn't about individual strength or cleverness. It's about fitting into a system, contributing to a collective, accepting your role in a delicate balance that has been refined over generations. At night, lying in your assigned spot on the sleeping platform, pressed between Olaf's daughter and old Ragnar, you can hear everything. The fire crackling softly, the animals shifting and breathing, children murmuring in their sleep, adults turning over their joints creaking, someone coughing, someone else whispering a prayer to Thor or Freya, or one of the household spirits that are believed to inhabit the posts and beams. The darkness is total. When the oil lamps are extinguished, and you're far from the fire's glow, you can't see your hand in front of your face. But you've learned to be comfortable in this darkness. Your other senses sharpen. You know people by the sound of their breathing, by their smell, by the particular way they move through space. This is the night habitat. This is what it means to shelter from the Arctic winter without fireplaces, without modern insulation, without any of the technology that will one day make cold a mere inconvenience rather than a constant threat to existence. And here, in this dark, smoky, crowded, odorous space, you are alive. You are warm enough. You are against all odds and expectations content. The wind picks up outside, and you hear it whistling through gaps in the roof, and someone rises to add wood to the fire, and life continues breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat through the long Arctic night. Outside, the world is trying to kill you. This isn't metaphorical. The physics of cold at these latitudes is implacable, brutal, and utterly indifferent to human survival. Understanding these physics, understanding exactly what you're up against, is part of what makes the Viking achievement so remarkable. Let's talk about what's actually happening out there in the darkness. The temperature tonight is probably around -20 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not counting wind chill, with the wind factoring in, and the wind is almost always a factor. The effective temperature is closer to -40 or below. At these temperatures, exposed skin freezes in minutes. Frostbite isn't a possibility, it's a certainty. But temperature is only part of the equation. The real danger is heat loss, and heat loss happens through multiple mechanisms that work together to drain the warmth from your body with ruthless efficiency. Cold steals warmth in 4 ways. First, by conduction, flesh against stone or frozen earth drinks heat like a glutton. Therefore, nothing touches the ground bare. Always hide wool or straw lies between. Second, by convection, wind tears away the thin cloak of warm air that clings to the skin. Still air may be endured. Moving air slays swiftly. Thus, the thick turf walls stand as windbreakers breaking the gale into harmless whispers. Third, by radiation, the body glows like a hearth, casting warmth outward into the night. In a cold hall, that glow is lost. Beside the fire, it is returned to you, flame to flesh, and the bones remember they are alive. Last, by evaporation, every breath is a tribute of moisture, every bead of sweat a thief of heat. Outside, men breathe through wool so the frost does not bite the lungs, and they move slow, lest damp garments turn to ice against the skin. 4 thieves the north sends against life. 4 shields the longhouse raises in answer. Inside the longhouse, all of these heat loss mechanisms are being carefully managed. The walls stop convection. The sleeping furs prevent conductive loss. The fire provides radiant warmth. The humid air from the animals reduces evaporative loss. And the collective body heat of multiple humans and animals creates a microclimate that, while still cold by modern standards, is survivable. But what happens when you have to leave this protected space? What happens when necessity forces you into the hostile environment? Outside Harold tells a story about this, and it's a story worth remembering. 3 winters ago, he begins his voice, carrying in the smoky darkness. A young man, good hunter, strong, maybe 20 winters old. He went out to check the fish traps. This was during Thori, the coldest month. Temperature like tonight, wind worse. He was gone maybe 2 hours checking traps along the frozen stream. Harold pauses to spit into the fire, watching it sizzle. When he came back, he couldn't feel his hands. This happens, yes. Hands go numb. You warm them slowly. But he made a mistake. He thrust his hands directly into hot water, trying to warm them fast. You can see where this is going, but Harold continues anyway. The flesh was frozen solid. Damage is permanent. He lost 3 fingers on his left hand, 2 on his right. Could have been worse. Could have been his feet. But now he can't hold a bow properly. Can't work a net, can't do half the things he used to do. All because he didn't understand the physics of freezing and thawing. This story illustrates a critical survival principle: patience. Everything here has to be done slowly, carefully, with constant awareness of cause and effect. Rush and you die, or you're crippled. The environment punishes haste more severely than it punishes almost anything else. Olaf the Hunter adds his own perspective. When I go out, he says Olaf has a quiet voice. You have to lean in to hear him. I think about layers, not layers of clothing, though that too, layers of decisions. First decision, do I go out at all? Is what I'm doing worth the risk? Second decision, when do I go midday, when there's some light, some slight warmth? Third decision, how long do I stay? always less time than you think you need. Fourth decision. What's my shelter plan if things go wrong? Where can I burrow into a snowdrift if I have to? He's describing a survival skill that goes beyond mere technique. He's describing an entire way of thinking, a constant risk assessment that factors in variables most people never consider. The Vikings measured distance not in miles, but in time to shelter. A place that's half a day away in summer might be 3 days away in winter, not because the physical distance changed, but because the travel conditions are so much more dangerous. You move slower, you need to rest more frequently, you need to plan multiple shelter points along the way. They also understand something about cold that modern science has only recently articulated. There's a threshold beyond which the human body simply can't generate enough heat to maintain core temperature no matter how much you eat, no matter how much you move. At a certain point, you're in an equation that can only end one way, and the only solution is shelter. The longhouse is not merely a place to live. It is a living engine built for one purpose alone, to keep its people breathing through a world determined to freeze them silent. Every detail is a reply to death itself. The smoke hole in the roof may invite the winter cold, yet without it, the fire would brew an invisible poison that steals life before dawn. The door is no rigid plank, but a thick weighted hide, soft enough to bow with the wind, heavy enough to seal tighter than any hinge forged by men. The sleeping platforms rise 2 feet above the earth, because cold air pools like dark water, and the height of a single hand can mean the difference between waking and never waking again. The entrance is carved to the south to catch whatever weak sunlight dares to appear, while the northern wall is built thick as a fortress, packed with turf, to hold back storms that come roaring from the edge of the world. Nothing in this house is coincidence. Every feature was learned in suffering, paid for with frozen hands, and graves too shallow to carve from the iron earth. The animals in the house. You've gotten used to their presence, but their placement isn't random. They're at the north end, the coldest end, because their body heat helps buffer that wall. A cow produces something like 1,400 BTUs per hour, just existing, just digesting hay and breathing. That's substantial. That's like having a small heater running constantly, and it doesn't require wood or oil or any human-made fuel. It's solar energy really converted through grass and stored as hay now being released as mammalian metabolism keeps 3 large animals alive and warm. Everything connects. Everything is part of a system. Remove one element, the animals, the thick walls, the small fire, the communal sleeping, and the whole thing falls apart. The Vikings didn't arrive at this system through science or engineering in the modern sense. They arrived at it through trial and error over centuries, through countless winters where some configurations worked and others failed, where success meant survival and failure meant death. This is a winter survival skill built on empirical observation, on paying attention, on remembering what worked, and teaching it to the next generation with absolute seriousness. Astrid sometimes runs drills, especially with the younger people. She'll say, "The house burns. What do you do?" And you have to answer quickly, correctly, because this isn't hypothetical. Buildings do burn. Fire that keeps you alive can also kill you. Grab furs, grab food, get everyone out, get to the storage shed. Someone answers. Storage shed is also on fire, Astrid says flatly. Snow shelter. Dig into a drift, cover the entrance huddle together. How long can you survive? 1 night? Maybe 2, if we're careful. And then, ski to the next settlement, hope they take us in. This kind of thinking, this constant awareness of fragility, of how quickly survival can become impossible, it changes you. You can't be casual about anything when everything matters this much. There's a small clay marker near the door, a crude representation of Thor with his hammer. Every time someone leaves the house, they touch it. This isn't superstition exactly, though it has that flavor. It's more like a physical reminder. Respect the power of what's outside these walls. Don't take it lightly. Come back. Most people do come back, but not everyone. Not every time. Last month, in a vicious storm, a young woman stepped out to check the sheep shed just 50 yards away. 20 minutes later, they found her curled in the snow, disoriented, unable to see the house standing right before her through the whiteout. She lived only because they found her quickly and warmed her with the right hypothermia protocol. An hour more, a moment's hesitation, and she would have been another fatal lesson in what this weather can take. The wind tonight is strong, but not devastating. Strong enough that snow is blowing horizontally, that visibility outside would be measured in feet rather than yards, but not strong enough to threaten the structural integrity of the house. You've experienced worse. There was a storm 2 weeks ago that made the walls shake, that sent snow filtering through gaps in the roof like powder, that had even experienced people like Astrid and Harold looking worried. That storm lasted 3 days. 3 days when no one could go outside for any reason. 3 days when the air inside the house became increasingly foul, when supplies of fresh water became an issue, when tempers frayed from being pressed together in the dark. But the house held. The fire stayed lit. And when the storm finally broke, when the wind dropped and people could venture out again, there was a collective exhale of relief, a renewal of faith in the structure that protects them. You've learned to read weather signs now. The quality of light during the brief midday twilight, the sound of wind against the walls, the way the animals behave. Sheep become restless before a storm. They know somehow that pressure is dropping, that wind is coming. Their agitation is a warning system more reliable than any instrument. There's also ice formation. Harold showed you this. On extremely cold, still nights, a thin layer of frost forms on the inside walls of the house, despite the fire and the body heat. This frost is beautiful, delicate crystals, growing in fractal patterns. But it's also a sign that the temperature differential between inside and outside has become extreme, that the balance is precarious. When you see frost on the inside walls, Harold said, you know you're barely winning the fight. The cold wants in. It's pressing against these walls with more force than you can imagine. We're only keeping it out through constant vigilance. The physics of survival here are so tight, so unforgiving, that there's almost no margin for error. And yet, people have lived this way for generations, have raised children, told stories, created art, laughed, loved, fought, reconciled, and carried on the business of being human, in conditions that seem designed to make human life impossible. That's the real wonder. Not that they survive. Survival is just a technical problem after all. The wonder is that they thrive, that they maintain culture and dignity and humor in the face of such relentless physical challenge. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. Inside, the fire burns low but steady. The walls hold. The system works breath by breath through another Arctic night. But before we lay down to sleep, we must confront a psychological reality that it's perhaps harder to understand than the cold itself. In our modern world, we construct walls not just to keep the weather out, but to keep people out. We crave privacy. We equate safety with solitude. But here in the shadow of the Arctic, privacy is a death sentence. To be alone is to be cold. To be separated is to die. There is a rawness to life in the longhouse that would shock a modern sensibility. Here, the boundaries of existence are stripped away. There are no sterile rooms for birth and no hidden corridors for death. A mother might groan in labor on one platform, while just 10 feet away, an elder rattles with the final breaths of pneumonia. The fluid of life and the stillness of death exist in the same smoky rooms, separated only by a thin curtain of wool and the respectful aversion of eyes. This forced intimacy creates a unique psychological state. It creates a social nervous system where your calm regulates my fear, where the steady heartbeat of the group overrides the panic of the individual. You are learning a forgotten winter survival skill, the art of co-regulation. When the storm screams outside, vibrating the very timber of the roof, you don't look at the walls, you look at the faces of the elders. If they are calm, you are calm. You borrow their courage because you don't have enough of your own. It creates a profound sense of us. In your world, you might listen to history to fall asleep to, as a way to unwind from a day of individual stress, seeking a moment of peace in a lonely room. But for them, peace was never lonely. It was dense. It smelled of humanity. It was the knowledge that if you cried out in a nightmare, 3 people would wake up before you even opened your eyes. There is a comfort in that, a heavy blanket-like comfort that we have largely lost. Consider the transparency of this life. You cannot hide a bad mood here. You cannot conceal a sickness. If you are afraid, the whole house smells your fear. If you are angry, the tension ripples through the room like a draft. This requires a level of emotional discipline that is in itself a winter survival skill. You learn to forgive quickly because you cannot walk away. You learn to swallow irritation because conflict burns energy you cannot afford to waste. And there is a deep, unspoken solidarity in their suffering. When the food runs low in February, you don't just feel your own hunger pangs. You see the hollow cheeks of the children and the thinning frame of the neighbor who slept against your back last night. This shared vulnerability strips away all pretense. You are seen, truly seen, in your weakest and most animal moments, shivering, hungry, fearful, and you are not rejected for it. You are held. This is the true message of the Longhouse, the insight that travels across 1,000 years to find you tonight. We were never meant to survive the winter alone. The self-made man is a myth that freezes to death in the first hour of an Arctic storm. Survival is an act of weaving bodies, weaving breaths, weaving stories into a net strong enough to catch us when we fall. So, as you lie in your own bed, perhaps feeling the solitude of your own room, let this story act as a phantom limb, a connection to that ancient circle. You are part of this lineage. The fact that you are alive today means that thousands of years ago, someone didn't give up. Someone kept the fire lit. Someone shared their warmth. This narrative is more than just history to fall asleep to. It is a reminder that resilience is in your DNA. Now understanding that our closeness is not just a necessity, but a shield, we are ready to sleep. Not just to close our eyes, but to enter the intricate architecture of rest that makes this winter survival skill possible. Let's look at how they built a machine for sleeping. Sleep in this environment is not rest in the sense you're used to. It's an active survival strategy, a skill that has to be learned and maintained like any other winter survival skill in the Arctic. Here's what happens inside your body. When you sleep, your metabolism slows and your heat production drops. In a warm room, that's harmless, even helpful. But in the longhouse's borderline cold, that drop becomes a threat. Without companions or proper insulation, your core temperature slips through the night. You won't necessarily freeze, but you'll wake drained and chilled, your body having spent hours fighting the cold instead of repairing itself. The solution, as with everything here, is communal. The sleeping arrangement is precise. Astrid oversees it like a general deploying troops. Bodies are positioned to maximize heat retention. The largest, warmest people, usually adult men on the outside of the group. Smaller people, children. The elderly in the middle, nestled in a matrix of warmth. The communal sleeping fur, that enormous reindeer hide, stretched over everyone tucked in, tight around the edges to trap warm air. This arrangement creates a microclimate under the fur. Your breath, everyone's breath, humidifies and warms the air in that pocket. Body heat that would normally radiate away is reflected back by the bodies around you. You're not just sharing space. You're sharing metabolic output, each person contributing to the collective warmth that keeps everyone alive. It sounds awkward, intimate, in a way that might seem uncomfortable. And at first it was. You came from a world where personal space was assumed, where sleeping meant privacy, where you could toss and turn without considering anyone else. That first night, pressed between strangers, feeling their warmth and breath, and movement, you barely slept at all. But you adapted. Humans are incredibly adaptable when the alternative is freezing. Now you can't imagine sleeping any other way. The warmth of Olaf's daughter on your left, old Ragnar's snoring presence on your right, these have become comforting essential. You sleep better this way than you ever did alone. The bedding beneath you is a quiet miracle of survival. First come the birch bark or reed mats, lifting you from the cold that seeps through the wood. Above them lies dense wool, felt 2 inches of warmth that keeps its insulating power even when damp. And on top, the fur reindeer if you're lucky, seal or bear if you're honored. Hollow hairs trap heat. The pelts cradle you in the warmth of a creature that once endured the same unforgiving world. The top covering the communal fur is typically reindeer, but sometimes sewn from multiple seal skins stitched together. It's heavy, 50 pounds or more, and that weight matters. It presses down, eliminates air gaps, creates a seal around the edges of the sleeping group. Light blankets would let cold air infiltrate. This heavy fur, combined with the weight of all the bodies beneath it, creates a genuine warm pocket. But there's an art to sleeping under these conditions that goes beyond just piling on insulation. You have to learn to breathe. If you breathe directly into the sleeping space, your breath, warm and moist, condenses on the underside of the fur, creating dampness and gradually degrading the insulation. So you learn to sleep with your head positioned so that you breathe through a small gap, venting warm breath away from the main sleeping area while keeping the rest of your body sealed in warmth. You have to learn to stay still. Every time you move, you disturb the thermal envelope. Cold air infiltrates, warm air escapes. So people learn to sleep almost motionless, or to move in synchronized ways with their sleeping neighbors, turning over together adjusting positions communally rather than individually. And you have to learn to wake at the right times. Throughout the night, someone has to tend the fire. There's an informal rotation. The person closest to the fire edge wakes first, maybe 2 hours after everyone settles in, slides out from under the fur as quickly as possible, disturbing others as little as they can, and makes the cold journey to the fire trench. They add wood. They adjust the layout of burning wood for more efficient combustion. They check that no embers have rolled out onto the floor. Then they return to the sleeping area, lift the edge of the communal fur, and burrow back in. This process repeats every 2 to 3 hours through the long night. It's an accepted disruption, a necessary one. People barely wake when it happens. You feel someone slide out. You feel a brief intrusion of cold air. You feel them return. And then you drift back into deeper sleep without really achieving full consciousness. The fire tender usually takes a moment before returning to sleep to relieve themselves. There's a designated area in the far corner, a shallow pit lined with ash and gravel where waste is deposited. It's crude, smelly, and deeply unpleasant by any modern standard. But it's better than going outside into the killing cold, better than the alternative of people holding their bladders until pain or embarrassment force them out into the night, potentially becoming disoriented and dying within yards of the house. In the morning, though, morning is a relative term in a place where dawn doesn't arrive. There's a ritual to waking. The person assigned to start the day wakes first. Usually Astrid or someone she's designated. They emerge from the sleeping area while everyone else remains cocooned, and they begin the process of bringing the house back to full activity. First, they build up the fire, transforming it from overnight maintenance level to working heat. They add enough wood to create flame and light, not just embers and warmth. Then they begin moving around, making small noises that gradually wake others without startling them. Ingrid usually wakes second. She's the keeper of food and warmth, the one who starts the morning routine of heating water and preparing the first meal. She moves to where the water barrel sits, a large wooden cask insulated with straw, and breaks through the thin ice that's formed overnight on the surface. Even inside the house, even with the fire burning all night, water freezes if it's still. She puts water in clay pots and places them near the fire to heat. While the water warms, she retrieves food from the storage area. Dried fish, a small amount of precious grain, sometimes dried berries or nuts, if they haven't been completely consumed already. These will become a warm porridge. The first food of the day, the fuel that will power everyone through the morning's work. One by one, the household stirs. Children wake first. They lose heat fastest and rise as soon as the fire warms the air. Then the adults rousing in a loose circle from closest to farthest from the hearth. The elders wake last, given the extra rest their colder bodies need. No one rushes. People drift out slowly, letting their bodies adjust to the chill. In this climate, sudden movement can be dangerous, shocking the heart, tightening the lungs, turning a simple morning into an emergency. Bjarke, the 10-year-old, has a specific job in the morning routine. He checks the animals, makes sure they've survived the night. This isn't paranoia. Animals can and do die overnight if they're weak or sick. A cow that was alive at dusk might be stiff with cold by dawn if something was wrong. So Bjarke climbs over the partition into the animal area and does a quick count, looking for eyes reflecting the new firelight, listening for breath and movement. Everyone's here, he calls back, and there's genuine relief in his voice. Every morning brings the possibility of loss, and every morning that everyone, human and animal, is still alive is a small victory. The transition from sleep to waking, from night to day, is managed carefully. This is a winter survival skill that's less obvious than fire building or shelter construction, but equally crucial, managing the psychological and physiological impact of long, dark, cold nights. The Vikings have developed routines and rituals that give structure to time when time itself has become ambiguous. Ragnar, the old saga keeper, sometimes wakes during the night. You hear him shifting, muttering to himself, occasionally calling out to spirits or gods. Harald has explained that Ragnar has lived through more than 70 winters, an almost unimaginable achievement. But that longevity comes with costs. His mind wanders. He confuses past and present, living and dead. He talks to his wife sometimes. Harald whispered to you once. She's been dead 20 winters, but in the dark, in the half-sleep, he forgets. He asks her to bring him water to check on a grandchild. It's sad, but also beautiful in a way. His love survived her death by decades. This is life here. Sleep is communal, waking is gradual, and every morning brings the same quiet miracle: we're still here. We made it through another night. We get to try again. The bedding itself requires maintenance. Every few weeks, when weather permits, the furs and wool are taken outside just briefly and beaten to remove dust and the accumulated detritus of living. They can't be washed, not in winter. Water is too precious. Drying is impossible. So they're aired and beaten and then brought back in slightly refreshed, ready to continue their service. The sleeping platforms are also maintained. Straw is turned over sodden sections, replaced with dry. The wooden framework is checked for wear or damage. A sleeping platform that collapses in the middle of the night could injure multiple people, could disrupt the entire household's rest, could create problems that cascade through the next day and beyond. Everything always is about maintaining the systems that keep people alive. Sleep in this context isn't rest or escape. It's work, carefully managed work, a nightly negotiation with cold and dark, and the basic physics of heat loss. And yet, despite all the practical considerations, despite the survival imperatives, people still dream here. Children still wake with tales of adventures and monsters. Adults still experience the full range of human sleep, from deep restoration to troubled half-waking, from dreams of summer, and plenty to nightmares of cold and hunger. Astrid once told you that she dreams every night of a different winter, a winter before she was scarred, before her husband died, when the settlement was larger and life felt less precarious. I wake up, she said, and for a moment I'm confused. Where is he? Why is the house arranged wrong? And then I remember, and I have to decide all over again to keep going. That's what sleep is here, a time when the guards come down, when vulnerability is unavoidable, and when the community has to protect each other, not through action, but through simple presence. We sleep together because we must, and in that necessity, something beautiful emerges, a trust so complete that you can render yourself unconscious, surrounded by others, confident that they'll keep the fire burning, that they'll wake you if danger comes, that you'll do the same for them. The night deepens. The fire burns low again. Bodies shift under the communal fur, finding new comfortable positions. Someone snores softly. A child whimpers and is soothed. The animals breathe their slow, steady rhythm. And through it all, the cold presses against the walls outside, patient and implacable waiting. The hours before sleep are perhaps the most vital of the entire day. This is when the household prepares itself, when the margin between survival and catastrophe is at its thinnest, when small mistakes in routine can compound into disaster. Astrid runs this time like a ship's captain preparing for a storm. Because in a sense, every night is a storm, an 8-hour period, when the household must function with minimal intervention, when problems must be anticipated and prevented rather than solved. The evening routine begins as the brief twilight period fades into total darkness. It's approximately the same time every day, judged not by clocks, but by the quality of light, or rather, the absence of it, and by the body's instinctive sense that day is ending. First task, secure the animals. This is usually Olaf's job, though others help. The 6 sheep, 2 goats, and 3 cattle are checked individually. Olaf runs his hands over each animal, feeling for injuries, for unusual heat or cold that might indicate illness for the general condition of their bodies. A sick animal is a dead animal in this weather, he explains as he works. And a dead animal is a loss we can't afford. Every one of these represents milk will meet warmth, so we check them every night, no exceptions. The animals are given water, not much, because water is precious and must be melted from snow, a process that consumes fuel and time. But enough to keep them hydrated enough to prevent the kidney problems that can kill livestock in winter. They're also given hay carefully rationed from the supply stored in the loft above the animal area. The hay supply is a constant source of anxiety. It was cut and dried during the brief summer months, piled in the loft, measured and remeasured to ensure it would last until spring. But hay is bulky and animals need a surprising amount. A single cow might eat 20 pounds of hay per day. Multiple that by 3 cows add in the sheep and goats, factor in waste and spoilage, and the math becomes terrifying. If they run out of hay before spring, the animals starve. If the animals starve, the humans lose their source of milk, their buffer against extreme cold, their emergency meat supply. Everything unravels. So Olaf counts. Every evening, he counts the bundles of hay remaining. He does the math in his head, compares it against his estimate of how long until spring, and reports to Astrid. She adjusts rations accordingly. Some nights, the animals get slightly less. This keeps them alive, but doesn't help them thrive. It's a gamble. Feed them too little, and they weaken, potentially dying before spring. Feed them too much, and the hay runs out early, guaranteeing death. It's the kind of decision that would paralyze most people. But Astrid makes it every night without visible hesitation. Because hesitation, uncertainty, second-guessing those luxuries belong to people who live in safer circumstances. While Olaf tends the animals, Ingrid manages the water supply. Water, paradoxically, is a huge problem in a place surrounded by frozen water. Snow and ice are everywhere, infinite in supply. But converting that frozen water into liquid form requires heat, and heat requires fuel, and fuel is limited. Every evening, Ingrid brings in several large blocks of packed snow. Not loose snow that's mostly air and yields little water, but hard-packed snow or ice blocks that she's prepared during the day, storing them near the entrance where they're accessible but protected from blowing away in storms. She places these blocks in large clay vessels near the fire. Not too close. If the ice melts too quickly, it can cause the clay to crack from thermal stress. But close enough that the heat gradually converts solid to liquid. This process takes hours. Water doesn't just appear. It's produced slowly, drop by drop through the expensive alchemy of heat applied to ice. The water that results is stored in wooden barrels lined with pitch to prevent leaking. This water is used for drinking, for minimal washing, for adding moisture to porridge, for feeding the animals. Every drop is accounted for. Nothing is wasted. Ingrid also tends the food preparation for the following day. She sets aside portions of dried fish measured carefully. She checks the remaining stores of grain-making calculations similar to Olaf's hay mathematics. She sometimes soaks dried peas or beans overnight, softening them for the next day's meal. Harold and old Ragnar have their own evening tasks. They maintain the fire pit, clearing ash that has accumulated, checking the stones that line the fire trench for cracks or damage. A cracked stone can lead to embers escaping into the straw on the floor, which can lead to the house burning down. So they check every evening, running their hands over the stones, feeling for problems before problems become catastrophes. They also prepare the wood for overnight burning. Not all wood burns the same. Some burns hot and fast, good for daytime heat, but wasteful for overnight. Some burns slow and steady, ideal for maintaining temperature through the long dark. Harold knows every piece of wood in the diminishing supply, knows which pieces to use, knows how to arrange them in the fire for maximum efficiency. This piece, he says, holding up a chunk of driftwood smoothed by years in the ocean. This is oak. Came from far south, washed up on the beach 2 summers ago. Oak burns slow, makes coals that last. This is an overnight piece. He sets it carefully at the edge of the fire pit. We'll add this after everyone sleeps. It'll burn through the night, keep the core temperature from dropping too low. The children have tasks too, though their tasks are designed as much for psychological health as for practical necessity. Bjarke gathers all the small clay oil lamps scattered around the house and brings them to Ingrid, who checks their oil levels, trims their wicks, and refills them from a larger vessel. Some lamps will be extinguished for the night oil, like everything else is rationed. But a few will be left burning at low levels, providing just enough light to navigate if someone needs to wake and move around. A girl named Hilda, Olaf's daughter, perhaps 12 winters old, has the task of straightening the sleeping areas. She adjusts the furs, redistributes the wool batting to fill in compressed areas, makes sure every sleeping position has adequate cushioning. It seems like domestic fussiness, but it matters. A person who sleeps poorly because they're uncomfortable will be less effective the next day, more prone to mistakes, more vulnerable to illness. There's also gear maintenance. Olaf works on his skis, checking the leather bindings, applying fat to the wood to prevent cracking. His skis are his lifeline, his means of hunting and fishing. When snow is deep, his potential escape route if disaster forces the household to scatter. They must be maintained, constantly treated with the respect of a warrior maintaining weapons. Astrid sharpens knives. This is done by firelight, the rhythmic sound of stone on metal providing a kind of meditation. The knives must be sharp, not for violence, though they could be used that way if raiders came, but for the countless small tasks that keep everyone alive. Cutting leather, slicing fish, trimming loose threads, scraping hides. Dull knives mean inefficiency, wasted effort, potential injury. As all these tasks are being completed, there's conversation. This is when stories are told, when news is shared, when the social bonds that hold the community together are maintained and strengthened. Harold is the primary storyteller, though others contribute. Tonight, He tells a tale about Loki, the trickster god, and how Loki stole Freya's necklace. It's a familiar story, everyone has heard it before, but Harold's telling brings new life to old words. He changes his voice for different characters, uses gesture and expression, pauses at key moments for dramatic effect. The children listen with complete absorption. They've heard this story a dozen times, but they never tire of it. And that's part of the point. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're cultural transmission, the way values and history and identity are passed from generation to generation in a society that has no writing, no books, no permanent records beyond memory. But the stories also serve a more immediate psychological function. They create a sense of continuity, of being connected to something larger than the present moment. When life is reduced to basic survival, when every day is a struggle against cold and hunger and darkness, these stories remind people that they're part of an ancient tradition, that their ancestors survived similar conditions, that endurance is not just possible, but noble. Ragnar, despite his wandering mind, sometimes contributes fragments of older stories, tales that go back to his grandfather's time and beyond. He speaks of winters even worse than this one, of years when the ice never fully melted, when summer was just a rumor. He speaks of the great famine of his youth, when half the settlement died before spring. But we survived, he always concludes. Some of us survived. And here you are, proof that survival matters, proof that endurance has value. There's also singing. Aslar, a woman of perhaps 30 winters, with a voice that carries despite the cramped space, leads the household in old songs. Some are work songs, rhythmic pieces meant to coordinate labor. Some are religious prayers to Thor for protection, to Freya for fertility, to the household spirits for benevolence. And some are simply beautiful melodies that predate memory, that connect this moment to countless other moments stretching back through generations. The singing serves multiple purposes. It uses oxygen breathing, deeply projecting voice, which helps clear lungs of the accumulated smoke and stale air. It unifies the group, creates a sense of shared purpose and identity. And it marks time, provides structure to the evening that helps everyone transition mentally from day to night. As the evening routine winds down, as tasks are completed and conversation dies, there's a shift in the atmosphere. People begin moving toward the sleeping areas. The final preparations are made. Someone makes one last check of the fire, ensuring it's burning at the right level for overnight maintenance. Someone else checks the door covering, making sure it's securely fastened against any wind that might rise during the night. Astrid does a final walk through her eyes, scanning the space, checking for anything amiss. She's looking for tools left in dangerous positions where someone might trip in the dark. She's looking for embers that might have rolled out of the fire pit. She's checking faces, assessing who seems ill or weak or troubled. "We're good," she finally announces. "Sleep well, everyone. May Thor keep watch while we rest." And with that, people burrow into the sleeping areas. Bodies arrange themselves in the practiced positions they've occupied for months. The communal fur is pulled up and tucked in. Breathing slows. Conversation drops to whispers and then to silence. One lamp is left burning very low, just enough to provide a reference point if someone wakes disoriented in the darkness. The fire burns steady, a glowing line through the center of the longhouse, providing just enough heat to keep the interior temperature above freezing. Outside, the wind continues its eternal song. Inside, silence gradually deepens, broken only by the soft sounds of sleep. Breathing occasional snores, someone shifting position, the crack of settling wood in the fire. The night routine is complete. The household has prepared itself as well as human ingenuity and experience allow. Now comes the vulnerable time, the hours when consciousness withdraws and the body must maintain itself with minimal intervention. Everything that could be done has been done. The rest is up to fortune, to the strength of the walls, to the gods, to the collective warmth of bodies pressed together in the dark. Sleep, when it comes, is earned. It's not rest. Exactly. It's more like a tactical retreat, a strategic withdrawal from consciousness during the most dangerous hours, trusting that preparation and routine will be sufficient to see everyone through to another dawn. The darkness here is different from any darkness you've known before. In your previous life, darkness meant night, a temporary absence of light, a condition that would be reversed in a few hours with the inevitable sunrise. Even the longest winter nights elsewhere were still nights, finite periods of darkness bookended by light. Here, darkness is a season. It's midwinter now, what the Vikings call murk, deep dark. The sun, if it manages to struggle above the horizon at all, does so for perhaps 2 hours around midday, creating a kind of prolonged twilight that never brightens into anything resembling day. The rest of the time, 22 hours out of every 24, is darkness complete and absolute. This does something to the human mind, not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, insidiously, the constant darkness begins to affect perception, mood, sanity itself. Ingrid, who has lived through more than 40 of these winters, tries to explain it to you one evening while working on a piece of weaving by firelight. The first year is hardest. She says, her fingers moving automatically through the familiar motions of the loom. Your body doesn't understand why morning never comes. You wake expecting light, and there's only darkness. You sleep, but you're not sure when you slept or for how long. Time becomes uncertain. She pauses, searching for words to describe something that resists description. Some people, they can't adjust. Their minds break from it. They become confused, angry, sad for no reason. They see things that aren't there, hear voices. I've seen strong men, warriors who fear nothing in battle, reduced to tears by the darkness. Because you can't fight it. You can't defeat it. You can only endure it. The Vikings have a term for this darkness-induced psychological distress, vetrarmedi. It translates roughly as winter weariness, but it encompasses more than simple fatigue. It describes the particular kind of mental exhaustion that comes from months of darkness, cold confinement, and monotony. Modern science would call it seasonal affective disorder, a clinically recognized condition caused by disruption of circadian rhythms and lack of sunlight affecting neurotransmitter production. But the Vikings understand it through experience rather than theory. They know that the darkness can make people sick in the mind, and they've developed strategies to combat it. The most important strategy is routine. The evening rituals, the morning tasks, the structured division of the day, all of this provides a framework of normalcy when environmental cues are absent. If you can't rely on sunrise to signal morning, you rely instead on the moment when Astrid wakes and begins building up the fire. If you can't judge time by the sun's position, you judge it by the sequence of tasks animal feeding, midday meal, evening preparation. Storytelling is another defense against vetramedi. The sagas Harold tells aren't just entertainment, they're anchors to sanity. They provide narrative structure when life itself seems structureless. They remind everyone that time is still moving forward, that winter is part of a cycle that will eventually turn towards spring. The stories also serve to maintain identity. In the monotonous darkness, when days blur together, when you can barely remember what sunlight looks like, the stories remind you who you are, a person connected to history, to heroic ancestors, to a cultural tradition worth preserving. Music and singing function similarly. When Aslao leads the household in old songs, she's not just passing time. She's combating the psychological isolation of the darkness. Human voices raised together create connection. Remind everyone that they're not alone, that they're part of something larger than their individual struggle. But despite all these strategies, the darkness still takes its toll. You've noticed changes in yourself. Dreams have become more vivid, more strange. Sometimes you wake unsure if what you experienced was dream or memory. The boundaries feel porous, unstable. Colors in dreams are more intense than anything in waking life, reds and greens and blues that seem to burn with impossible brightness. Compensation, perhaps, for the monochrome reality of smoky firelight and shadow. Ragnar's condition, his confusion between past and present, living and dead, is an extreme version of something everyone experiences to some degree. In the darkness, with minimal external stimulation, the mind turns inward. Memory becomes as vivid as immediate perception, sometimes more vivid. Harold has told you about a phenomenon he calls the fetch, seeing your double your ghost self, especially at twilight or in uncertain light. It's not supernatural, he insists, though many believe otherwise. It's the mind's way of processing isolation and stress, projecting consciousness outward as a protective mechanism. You'll know when you see it, he said. A figure at the edge of your vision, moving like you, wearing clothes like yours. Don't be afraid. It means your mind is working hard to keep you sane, creating a companion when real companionship isn't enough. You haven't seen your fetch yet, but you've noticed other perceptual oddities. Shadows seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. Sounds are difficult to locate. They seem to come from everywhere and nowhere. Distance judgment becomes unreliable in the uniform gloom of the interior. Curiously, the animals seem untouched by the darkness. Sheep and cattle simply sleep more and wait. Their moods stay steady. One evening, this sparks a quiet debate. Astrid says, beasts live only in the moment. They neither dread tomorrow nor long for yesterday. Winter is just winter to them. We are different. We carry summer inside our heads even when the sun is gone. That memory gives us hope, yet it also makes the dark heavier. Olaf shakes his head. No beasts remember well enough. My dog finds the fishing holes under fresh snow. Reindeer walk home to grounds they have not seen in a year. The true difference is speech. We can name our sorrow and share it. They suffer alone. These discussions happen frequently during the long, dark evenings. They're not abstract philosophy. They're attempts to understand and cope with the psychological reality of winter, to find meaning in hardship. Children handle the darkness differently from adults. They adapt more easily because they have less comparison, less expectation. For Bjarke and the other young ones, this is simply winter, an accepted fact of existence. They don't seem to experience the same depth of vetramedi that affects adults. But children do become more irritable, more prone to sudden outbursts of crying or anger. Confined space, lack of stimulation, constant presence of adults. It's psychologically difficult even if they don't have the vocabulary to express what they're feeling. Astrid manages this through assigning small responsibilities, giving children a sense of purpose and competence. Bjarke's morning animal check isn't just practical, it's psychological maintenance. It gives him a role, a reason to wake up, a way to contribute. Without such structure, children can become listless, withdrawn, or destructively energetic. There's also the phenomenon of winter dreaming, prolonged periods of what looks like daydreaming, but is actually a kind of wakeful hibernation. People sit staring at the fire for hours, not quite asleep, but not fully awake either, conserving mental and physical energy. This is considered normal, even healthy, during the deepest winter. The body and mind slow down, matching the pace of the frozen world outside. But there's a line between healthy winter dreaming and dangerous withdrawal. Ingrid watches for signs of the latter, someone who stops participating in conversations, who stops eating adequately, who shows no response to stimulation. These are warning signs of severe vetramedi, and they require intervention. The intervention usually involves forced engagement, giving the person tasks they must complete, requiring their participation in group activities, sometimes even a mild confrontation to snap them out of their withdrawal. It's not subtle, but subtlety is a luxury. When someone's mental health is deteriorating, direct action is necessary. Light, what little there is, becomes precious beyond measure. The brief period of twilight around midday, when the southern horizon shows a faint grayness that might be called light in a generous mood this time, is treasured. People make efforts to be outside during these hours, even though the cold is brutal, even though there's minimal practical reason to expose themselves. Why? Because the mind needs light, needs it desperately, needs the visual confirmation that the world still exists, that darkness isn't total and permanent, that the sun somewhere somehow is still real. Harold describes this need as feeding the eyes. Just like the body needs food, he says, the eyes need light. Starve them too long and they forget how to see properly. Colors fade. Distance perception fails. So we feed them even with the thin gruel of winter twilight. The oil lamps help but don't fully solve the problem. Their yellow flickering light creates as many shadows as it dispels. And the quality of lamplight is different from daylight, warmer in color, but somehow less substantial, less real. It's light as memory rather than light as presence. Dreams, as mentioned, become extraordinarily vivid. This is documented in the sagas where winter dreams are often treated as prophetic, as messages from gods or ancestors. Whether they're actually prophetic is debatable, but their intensity is not. People wake from winter dreams, convinced they've visited other worlds, spoken with the dead, seen the future. Ragnar insists his dreams are true visions. Last night, he dreamed of a ship with black sails approaching the fjord, carrying news of death. Today, he's agitated, worried, checking repeatedly toward the door, as if expecting disaster. Astrid handles this gently. Ragnar, there are no ships in winter. Ice closes the fjord. Your dream is just a dream. But Ragnar shakes his head stubbornly. Ice melts. Spring comes. The ship will come. She doesn't argue further. What would be the point? In his mind, the dream is real. And maybe there's comfort in that, in believing that some greater power is communicating with him, that his suffering has meaning beyond mere endurance. You've had your own significant dreams. Last week, you dreamed of walking through the snow under full sunlight, warm despite the whiteness all around, and the happiness of that dream lingered for days, providing a psychological boost that was measurably real. You moved through tasks with more energy, spoke more readily, with others felt more connected to life. Astrid noticed. "Good dream," she asked, and when you described it, she nodded approvingly. "Hold that. Remember it. When the dark feels heaviest, go back to that dream in your mind. It's medicine." This is a winter survival skill that's often overlooked in discussions of Arctic survival. The ability to manage one's own mind to maintain psychological equilibrium when every external condition is hostile to mental health. The Vikings don't have therapy or medication, but they have strategies, routine, story song community, and the deliberate cultivation of hope. Hope is the key word. Without hope that spring will eventually arrive, without faith in the cycle's completion, the psychological burden of winter becomes unbearable. So hope is carefully maintained, discussed, reinforced in every conversation and story. Spring always comes, people say. Always has, always will. It's repeated like a mantra, a counterspell against despair. And it's true, of course. Spring does come. But the mind trapped in perpetual darkness struggles to believe it. The emotions don't follow logic. You can know intellectually that winter ends while feeling emotionally that it will last forever. Managing that disconnect between intellectual knowledge and emotional reality is perhaps the hardest psychological work of winter. It requires constant vigilance, constant self-talk, constant reaching out to others for reassurance that yes, this is normal. Yes, you're not losing your mind. Yes, spring is real. Even though it seems impossible right now, the darkness presses in, patient and implacable. But the human mind pushes back, using every tool at its disposal to maintain sanity connection and hope through the long Arctic night. This is history to fall asleep to, but it's also history that matters. History that teaches something essential about human resilience and the strategies we use to survive not just physical challenges, but psychological ones. The fire burns low, shadows deepen, and in the darkness the community huddles together, keeping each other sane as surely as they keep each other warm. They understand time in a way that feels almost like another language. For you, time is numbers and devices, hours, minutes, digital certainty. For them, time is shaped by land and light as physical as the mountains that frame the horizon. They don't ask for the hour. They ask where the sun stands, or in winter what task this moment demands. Harold calls their system ached. The horizon divided into 8 markers each, a direction each a time. When the sun brushes the peak of Dagmesfell, it means the day's main meal, not because a clock says noon, but because the landscape says now. Time is local, intimate, specific. In one valley, it's afternoon. In the next, it isn't. But winter breaks this system. With no sun to read, solar time dissolves. Social time replaces it. We wake when Astrid wakes, eat when Ingrid cooks rest, when our bodies insist. As Astrid puts it, winter is when you live inside moments instead of counting them. The calendar is equally elemental. A year isn't 4 seasons, but 2 summer and winter, action and siege. Spring and autumn are only thresholds. Winter begins with Vetaneta in October. Summer returns at Sumarauki in April. Their month names are blunt truths, Gormanudur, the slaughtering month. Ilir, Yule month. Mursugur, the fat-sucking month. Thori, the month ruled by King Frost. Nothing poetic, just survival set into language. Because lunar months drift from the solar year, they add an extra week every few years. Not for neat mathematics, because mistiming summer would disrupt everything they depend on. Precision is practical, not philosophical. People count age not in years, but winters survived. To have lived 40 winters is an achievement. 70 winters makes Ragnar almost mythic. Winters are what shape you. Summers only heal what winter carved away. Daily time shrinks to shorter cycles. The interval between meals, animal feeding, fire tending. No one measures it, yet the rhythm rarely falters. The body has its own clock, and here that's enough. Birthdays don't matter. Collective milestones do the end of winter, the first chip of spring, the harvest. A child becomes an adult, not at a number, but at competence. First successful hunt, first crisis managed. Astrid became an adult at 13 after delivering a breech calf alone. Skill, not age, defines you. Deep winter, scam de gay. The short days is a suspended world. Productivity softens. People sleep more. The culture bends with reality because rigidity breaks faster than ice. Rituals mark the psychological passage through darkness. Joel, the midwinter point, isn't celebration so much as an acknowledgement that the darkest moment has passed. A great log is brought in. Everyone touches it before it burns, letting the fire carry their fears upward in the smoke. Sometimes they sacrifice something precious to welcome back the sun. Silver, a choice cut of meat. Ritual gives agency when nature gives none. Thorablot. The offering to King Frost arrives in late January. The head of the household dresses absurdly, walks backward, makes noise and mocks winter. It's funny, eerie and necessary. Fear becomes a character you can tease. Community becomes a shield you can hold. After Thori comes Goa, gentler, hinting at spring. Then Einmanudur, the solitary, month before summer, the most dangerous of all. Food nearly gone, spirits thin, bodies weak. Ice too unstable to travel, land too frozen to forage. This is when people die, not in the brutal cold, but in the final stretch when endurance runs dry. Astrid rationed supplies more strictly. Every bowl a calculation, every reassurance a necessary fiction. "We will make it," she said, whether she believed it or not. And that phrase becomes a spell. We make it because we say we will. Their understanding of time, solar, social, seasonal ritual, creates an invisible structure strong enough to hold people through the dark. It is architecture as vital as walls and firewood. It steadies the mind when the world outside erases all boundaries. And it works. Not flawlessly. People still falter, still sicken, still lose hope. But enough survive again and again, proving the system sound. The fire cracks softly. Shadows shift along turf walls. And the old rhythms continue, binding this night to countless others, back to the first people who dared claim life in a place built only for endurance, and from that endurance somehow made meaning. There's a question that grows heavier the longer you stay. How do they stay human in a place designed to break the human spirit? Surviving physically is straightforward. Fire insulation, food, shared heat. But surviving emotionally, keeping meaning, connection, dignity, that is the real art. Ingrid explains it best. We stay alive because of the invisible things, our relationships, our stories, our agreements about who we are. Without that, this house is just a shelter, not a home. Harold adds, a life only matters if someone remembers it. Community is our immortality. You begin to see why stories' praise and reputation matter so deeply. Why even a child's small success is spoken aloud and woven into the household memory. Here, honor means reliability, not glory, being someone others can depend on. The culture is both equal and hierarchical. Everyone shares food and hardship, but decisions follow proven competence. It's flexible because rigidity kills. Belief, too, is practical. Spirits, rituals, prayers. They soothe fear, bind people together, and give shape to chaos, whether or not anyone expects literal miracles. Conflicts are handled through the thing, a formal space where grievances become solutions before resentment can rot the group from within. In these close quarters, privacy vanishes, but shame doesn't rule. Bodies birth illness, aging. Everything is shared, witnessed, accepted. Dignity comes from conduct, not concealment. Children grow by watching and doing. Elders are honored for surviving many winters. Everyone belongs to everyone. And that's the heart of it, culture. Story, ritual, memory, trust is the real survival tool. Humans alone couldn't endure this cold. But humans together, held by meaning and connection, can outlast even an Arctic winter. Humanity, you realize, isn't something you carry alone. It's something the community carries for you. As full darkness settles and the household prepares for sleep, there's a physical and emotional transition that's become so familiar you barely notice it anymore. But tonight, aware that you're observing with fresh attention, you notice everything. The sleeping arrangement is a choreography refined over generations. First, Astrid inspects the sleeping platforms one final time, running her hand along the edges, checking for splinters or loose boards that could cause injury in the night. She adjusts the furs, making sure there are no gaps where cold air could infiltrate. Then the positioning begins. "Elders in," Astrid says quietly. This is the pattern oldest and most vulnerable toward the center where warmth accumulates. Ragnar shuffles to his assigned spot, moving slowly but without help. He's proud, doesn't want to be treated as infirm, though everyone knows he's increasingly fragile. Next are the children. Bjarke and the younger ones are settled into the warm middle positions, nestled between adults who will unconsciously monitor them through the night, adjusting furs, responding to coughs or cries without fully waking. Working adults' outer ring, Astrid continues. This is you, Olaf, and his daughter Hilda, several others whose names you've learned. Your bodies, being younger and more robust, can better tolerate the marginally colder temperatures at the edges of the sleeping mass. But here's the crucial detail: you're not suffering for the comfort of others. The entire system only works if everyone is warm enough. The elders and children in the center aren't stealing warmth. They're part of the thermal mass that keeps everyone alive. Their presence, their body heat, radiates outward, contributing to the collective warmth that benefits all. It's a brilliant adaptation, biological, social, and architectural all at once. As people settle in, there's quiet conversation. Olaf tells Hilda a brief story about the constellation visible through a gap in the roof, though stars are barely visible through the smoke and cloud cover. It's more the ritual of storytelling than the story itself that matters. Aslaug hums a low melody, something ancient and wordless. Others join in creating a harmony that fills the space. The humming continues for several minutes, gradually slowing, deepening, becoming almost a collective vibration rather than distinct voices. This is another sleep preparation technique you've learned. The humming aligns. Everyone's breathing creates a shared rhythm that helps the group transition to rest simultaneously. It's not planned or discussed. It just happens, a cultural practice so deeply embedded that no one thinks about it consciously. The youngest child, an infant, perhaps 6 months old, is positioned between two adults who can respond quickly if she wakes hungry or cold. Her mother, Thyra, arranges herself so the baby can nurse without requiring full wakefulness. Night feeding happens multiple times, a quiet exchange of sustenance that barely disturbs anyone else. "Everyone's settled?" Astrid asks. Murmurs of affirmation ripple through the group. "Fire tenders." She's confirming the rotation. Harold nods. "First watch," then points to Olaf. "Second," then to you. "Third." You nod. You've done this before, but the responsibility never feels routine. Letting the fire die would be catastrophic, and knowing you'll be responsible for it during your watch creates a low level of anxiety that actually helps you wake when needed. "Sleep well, all of you," Astrid says. "May the Husvatir keep watch, may Thor's hammer guard us, may we wake to another day." Another day, several voices repeat. It's not quite a prayer, not quite a wish, more like a statement of intent. The communal fur is pulled up a process that requires coordination. Multiple hands lift the heavy hide, adjust it, tuck it in along the edges. The weight of it settling over everyone is comforting, like being embraced, protected. Within minutes, the space under the fur has warmed noticeably. Your breath, everyone's breath, is trapped and recycled. Body heat that would normally radiate away is reflected back by the bodies around you. The temperature differential isn't dramatic, maybe 5 or 6 degrees. But in an environment where every degree matters, it's the difference between comfortable sleep and shivering misery. You're positioned between Hilda on your left and an older man named Sigurd on your right. Hilda has claimed the territory near you with the casual assumption of someone who's lived her whole life in communal sleeping arrangements. Her back presses against your side, not sexually. There's nothing sexual about this intimacy, but simply for warmth, for the mammalian comfort of proximity. Sigurd snores softly. He's a wounded warrior from a raid several years ago, walks with a permanent limp from an injury that never quite healed. But he's still valuable to the household for his knowledge of weapons leatherworking and the wisdom that comes from having survived multiple winters and several violent confrontations. The fire in the center of the house has been adjusted for overnight burning. It's smaller now, just enough to maintain temperature without consuming too much fuel. The light it produces is minimal, a dull red glow that barely illuminates the central trench. In the near total darkness, other senses sharpen. You hear everything: the snap of wood in the fire, the breathing of 20-some humans and several animals, the occasional bleat or low from the livestock area, the wind outside pressing against the walls. You smell everything too: smoke, unwashed bodies, animal dung, the mineral scent of the turf walls, wool, the faint sweetness of dried herbs hanging from ceiling beams. And you feel everything. Hilda's warmth, Sigurd's bulk, the weight of the fur, the hardness of the sleeping platform beneath you, the slight draft that somehow finds its way in, despite all the insulation. For the first few weeks here, this sensory intensity made sleep difficult. Now it's become comforting. These sounds, smells, and sensations mean safety, mean community, mean you're not alone against the cold. Your mind drifts toward sleep, but not in a straight line. Thoughts rise and fade, memories of your previous life, whatever and wherever that was now feeling dreamlike and uncertain, observations about the day just past, anticipation of the watch you'll need to stand in a few hours, random fragments of conversation, images, sensations. This is the borderland between waking and sleeping, a liminal state that can last for minutes or hours. You never quite know, because time becomes fluid here. You're aware of others going through similar transitions. Someone mutters words you don't catch. A child shifts position, size settles. Someone coughs lightly and is silent again. The social warmth here isn't just physical heat, though that's part of it. It's the psychological warmth of being held by a community, of knowing that you're not expected to survive this alone, that your vulnerabilities are understood and accommodated rather than judged. In your previous life, sleep was often solitary, private, a withdrawal from others. Here, sleep is the most communal act of all. You surrender consciousness surrounded by others doing the same, all of you trusting each other to maintain the systems, fire, shelter, warmth, that keep everyone alive. This trust isn't sentimental, it's necessary. But necessity has created something that feels almost like love, or at least like the kind of deep acceptance that might be more valuable than romantic love. You belong here, not because of any special quality you possess, but simply because you're here, because you contribute what you can, because you're part of the collective breathing mass of humanity pressed together against the cold. The drowsiness deepens. Your thoughts become more disjointed, more dreamlike. Images from the day blend with images from memory impossible to distinguish. Hilda mumbles something in her sleep, presses closer. You shift slightly to accommodate her, and she settles without waking fully. This unconscious negotiation of space and comfort happens constantly through the night. Small adjustments, responses to discomfort, all without achieving full consciousness. The social order of sleeping is maintained even in sleep itself. You don't sprawl, don't take more space than allocated. Your sleeping self has learned the rules. Stay within your area. Contribute your warmth. Receive warmth from others. Maintain the collective envelope. Somewhere in the darkness, the infant whimpers and is quickly soothed by Thyra. The sound of nursing, soft, sucking, satisfied baby sounds, is briefly audible before silence returns. This, too, is part of the social warmth, the acceptance that life continues even in sleep, that babies need to nurse, that bodies have requirements that can't be postponed. There's no irritation at the disturbance, no resentment, just accommodation, adjustment, return to rest. The fire crackles very softly. The animals breathe their slow rhythm. And the household sleeps, held together by necessity, and by choice, by physical warmth, and by something deeper that has no name, but feels essential to survival. You're sliding now thoughts, fragmenting awareness, dissolving into something less defined than consciousness, but not quite sleep. This is the descent. This is the letting go. This is trust made physical. Trusting the house to hold the fire, to burn the others, to tend what needs tending the morning to come, eventually, even though it seems impossible in this darkness. Your last coherent thought is gratitude for warmth, for community, for having survived another day, for the possibility of surviving another night. And then you're gone. Consciousness releasing its grip, body and mind, surrendering to the restorative void of sleep. In the depths of the night, in the space between Henrik's watch and yours, you surface briefly to semi-consciousness. The house is breathing. That's the only way to describe it. The collective inhalation and exhalation of multiple humans and animals creates a rhythm, a pulse, a living quality to the space. The walls seem to contract and expand with each breath cycle. The darkness itself seems to be breathing. You're aware without being fully awake, aware of Hilda's warmth still pressed against you, aware of Sigurd's snoring softer now, almost melodic, aware of the fire burning low in its trench, a line of dull red that divides the darkness without really illuminating it. Through the smoke hole, currently open a crack because the wind has shifted favorably. You can see a patch of sky. Stars are visible, sharp and cold, impossibly distant. Somewhere beyond this roof, beyond this smoke, beyond this valley, the cosmos continues its vast, indifferent rotation. But that coldness, that cosmic indifference, doesn't penetrate here. The house holds it out. The community holds it out. This small bubble of warmth and breath and human presence exists in defiant opposition to the emptiness outside. Time passes. You're not sure how much. Could be minutes, could be an hour. Time in this state is elastic, meaningless. You become aware of movement. Someone, Harold, you think, sliding out from under the communal fir to tend the fire. You hear, rather than see him, the whisper of hide being lifted, the slight disturbance of cold air footsteps soft on the packed earth floor. He works quietly, the sound of wood being placed carefully on coals, a soft breath blown to encourage flame. The fire responds, brightening slightly, and in that brief increase of light, you see his silhouette bent over his task, patient and methodical. He completes the work, checks the animal area. You hear a quiet word spoken to the cattle, a reassuring sound, and returns to the sleeping area. The fur lifts, settles. Cold air swirls briefly and is absorbed into the collective warmth. You drift back toward deeper sleep. Dreams begin to intrude, though you're aware enough to recognize them as dreams. You're walking through snow under impossible sunlight, bright and warm simultaneously, with cold and white. Someone is with you. You can't see their face, speaking in a language you don't understand but somehow comprehend anyway. The dream shifts. You're in a longhouse, but it's not this one. Larger, older, filled with people you don't recognize, but who recognize you. They're celebrating something. The end of winter, maybe, or a victory, or a birth. Music plays, laughter echoes, and you feel joy so intense it's almost painful. Then that dissolves. You're outside again, but it's summer now, impossible, summer with grass green and sky blue, and the sun a presence so warm and constant you want to weep. You're working, building something, repairing something, and the work is satisfying, meaningful in a way that transcends the specific task. These dream cycles continue rising and fading, blending with moments of near wakefulness when you're aware of the actual physical space, the breathing around you, the fire's glow, the weight of the fur. The boundary between dream and waking becomes porous. You're simultaneously in the longhouse and in some other space, some dream landscape that feels as real as physical reality, maybe more real. This is the psychological space of deep winter sleep, unmoored from normal waking logic, adrift in consciousness that's neither one thing nor another, sustained by physical warmth and community presence, even as the mind wanders through impossible territories. Somewhere in this drift, you become aware of singing, very faint, barely audible. Is it real or dreamed? You can't tell. A woman's voice, Aslog. Someone else, singing something ancient, wordless, just melody and feeling. The singing seems to come from very far away and very close simultaneously. It wraps around you like additional warmth, like sound made tangible, like protection. You surrender to it. Let it carry you deeper into sleep, into the dreamless void where restoration happens, where the body repairs itself, where consciousness rests and regenerates. The last thing you're aware of, and you're not sure if you're aware of it or dreaming awareness, is a sense of profound safety. Despite everything, despite the cold, the darkness, the constant precariousness of survival. In this moment, wrapped in communal warmth, held by culture and architecture, and the simple fact of other humans choosing to protect each other, you feel safe. Safer perhaps than you ever felt in whatever life you came from. Because this safety isn't about comfort or convenience. It's deeper. It's existential. It's the safety that comes from knowing your life is woven into other lives, that your survival is tied to community survival, that you matter because you're part of something larger. The breathing continues, the fire burns, the walls hold, and you sleep, truly sleep consciousness, dissolving completely into the restorative darkness. Hours pass. The night deepens and then gradually, imperceptibly begins its long climb toward morning, though morning in midwinter is barely distinguishable from night. Your watch comes. Your body knows it somehow, some internal clock that functions even in sleep. You surface gradually, coming up from deep rest through layers of lighter sleep, finally achieving enough consciousness to remember your turn to tend the fire. You slide out from under the fur carefully, trying not to disturb Hilda and Sigurd. Cold air hits you immediately. Not brutal cold, but noticeable after the warmth of the sleeping area. You're wearing most of your clothes, as everyone does for sleep, so you're not completely exposed. You make your way to the fire trench. The coals are still glowing, but need attention. You add wood, just enough arrange it properly to maximize burn time while conserving fuel. The wood catches small flames rising, and for a moment the interior brightens enough to see details. The sleeping area is a mass of furs and bodies, indistinguishable individuals blended into collective form. The animals in their section are mostly lying down, conserving energy, their eyes reflecting the firelight in brief, bright points. You take a moment to look around to appreciate this space, this achievement. 4 walls of turf holding out the Arctic. 1 small fire keeping 20-some souls alive. A social structure refined over generations, allowing humans to survive where they have no physical right to exist. It's beautiful in its way. Not pretty. There's nothing pretty about survival this raw. But beautiful in the sense of being true, being functional, being an honest response to genuine necessity. You return to the sleeping area, lift the edge of the communal fur burrow back into your spot. Hilda and Sigurd have rolled slightly toward each other. In your absence, closing the gap, maintaining thermal efficiency. You press between them carefully, and they unconsciously adjust to accommodate you. Within minutes, you're warm again. Within minutes more, you're drifting back toward sleep. The fire burns. The night continues. The community sleeps. And outside, beyond the walls, beyond the careful human order, the Arctic winter presses down with patient, implacable force. But it does not break through. The house holds. The people hold. The culture holds. This is the true winter survival skill, not the ability to make fire or build shelter, though those matter. Not the ability to store food or ration water, though those matter too. The deepest survival skill is this: the ability to trust. To trust the house, the fire, the community. To trust that others will wake when needed, will tend. What must be tended will maintain the fragile systems that keep everyone alive. To trust enough to sleep, to release consciousness, to be vulnerable in a hostile environment. Because you know that you're protected by something larger than yourself. That trust, that surrender, that faith, not in gods, but in each other. That's what survival looks like in the Arctic night. The breathing continues, synchronized, now deep and slow. The fire glows. The darkness holds everything in its vast, cold embrace, but cannot penetrate the small, warm bubble of human life that persists breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat, through the endless winter night. Sleep deepens. Dreams rise and fade. The hours pass. And slowly, imperceptibly, the longest night begins its gradual surrender to the possibility of dawn. The night is deep around you now. You've traveled far tonight across more than 1,000 years into a world so different from your own that it seems almost mythical. But it's not myth, it's history. It's real people, real struggles, real victories, measured not in glory, but in simple survival. Those Viking families clinging to existence at the edge of the Arctic Circle. They weren't heroes in the conventional sense. They were just humans trying to stay alive in a world that offered no guarantees. But in that trying, in that refusal to give up, in that determination to not just survive, but to maintain culture and dignity and meaning through impossible conditions, they achieved something heroic nonetheless. They survived without fireplaces, without chimneys, without central heating or electric lights, or any of the 1,000 comforts you take for granted. They survived through knowledge, through community, and through the winter survival skills they'd refined over generations. They survived through thick walls of turf and stone, through careful fire management, through sharing body heat with each other and with their animals, through story and song and ritual that kept minds intact when darkness and cold threatened to break them. They survived through trust. Trust in their architecture, trust in their social bonds, trust in the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors, and trust in each other. And in surviving, they created something remarkable, a culture that could thrive in conditions that should have made human life impossible. They didn't just endure the Arctic winter. They built lives there, raised children there, told stories, made art, laughed, loved, fought, reconciled, and passed down traditions that would echo through centuries. We're separated from them by more than time. We live in different worlds, guided by different assumptions, protected by technologies they couldn't have imagined. But we're still connected. Their determination, their ingenuity, their refusal to surrender to circumstance, these are human qualities that persist across time. When you face your own winters, literal or metaphorical, remember them. Remember that humans have survived worse than whatever you're facing. Remember that isolation can be overcome through community, that darkness can be endured through ritual and routine, that cold can be held at bay through careful planning and collective effort. Remember that survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just waking up, doing the work, tending the fire, sharing what you have, and trusting that morning will eventually come even when the night seems endless. The longhouse stands somewhere in your mind, now a symbol of human resilience. The fire still burns in that central trench, tended by hands separated from yours by centuries, but connected by shared humanity. The walls still hold against the cold. The community still sleeps in the darkness, protected by nothing more than turf and timber and trust. And spring will come. It always does. No matter how long the winter, no matter how dark the night, spring returns. The ice melts. The birds return. The sun traces its familiar arc across the sky once more. The cycle continues. That's the deepest lesson of the Viking Arctic winter, that everything passes, even this. That survival is possible even when it seems impossible. That humans working together can endure anything. So rest now. Let your breathing slow. Let your body settle into comfort. You're safe and warm, protected by systems and technologies those long ago Vikings couldn't have imagined. But you're also connected to them through the simple fact of being human, of facing challenges, of enduring. Sleep well. May your dreams be gentle. May your rest be deep. And may you wake tomorrow with gratitude for warmth, for light, for community, for all the small miracles that make life possible. This has been another journey through history to fall asleep to. Thank you for traveling with me tonight. Back to a time when winter was a siege and survival was never guaranteed, but humans persisted anyway, because that's what we do. Good night. Sleep well. And remember, even the longest winter eventually surrenders to spring. The fire burns low, the darkness deepens, and the ancient story continues breath by breath through another night.